Okay, we're at it again. Welcome to another episode of Integration Insider, where we share insights from the world of systems integration. And today we've got a special series that we're going to roll out on MuleSoft migrations, specifically demystifying MuleSoft migrations to Azure.
So I'm Derek Marley, and this is Tim Beaver. We're both with Horton Cloud. We're a Microsoft business partner, hyper-focused on systems integration. So a little bit of a backstory on us, our team. We come from the MuleSoft ecosystem. We've been doing systems architecture and delivery of MuleSoft for a very long time. I've been doing systems integration for over 25 years. So if you think about our team having the pedigree of MuleSoft, we come with the architects, the delivery side of that, and now focused primarily just on Azure integration services. Yeah. That's why that little backstory is probably relevant to today's video. And
our original company with MuleSoft engineers was actually absorbed into Salesforce. So there's a deep-rooted history of experience that we have with MuleSoft, which is relevant for moving into this MuleSoft demystification and migration to Azure. So with that, let's kick it off.
So I think maybe to start this one off, so we did some videos where we talked about kind of our methodology around migration off of MuleSoft onto Azure. We've talked about some of the benefits of that in the past, but I think this one, what we want to do is kind of break it down a bit. When we think about that migration, sometimes it's daunting. So when we released those videos, we started getting a lot of requests, hey, can you help me understand this better? And so that's what this video is about. We're going to demystify maybe from a MuleSoft. What does that look like on Azure Integration Services?
Yeah.
So, let's dive in.
Yeah, let's dive in. Okay, let me share screen. All right, so let's jump in. So really what we want to do is just demystify this process, starting with a little bit of background. So you've got, obviously, you're familiar with Salesforce and MuleSoft. Salesforce acquired MuleSoft in 2018 for $6.5 billion. So they acquired a product. That product does get developed on, but it's a product. It works well for some organizations, doesn't work well for others. On the other side, you've got Microsoft and Azure's integration services, which they call Azure Integration Services, AIS for short, is actually on September 10th, 2024. At the time of this recording is going to be in about a week's time, is its 10-year anniversary. So these services have been built up over 10 years, which have built up quite a sophisticated catalog of products.
Over 200.
200 plus, yeah. So it's quite remarkable what Microsoft has to offer in this enterprise integration space.
So this is the start of probably demystifying. So how do we get to integration on the MuleSoft side being a flow, and then ultimately what we wanted to show is on the Azure side, how do we create flows to solve those business processes?
Because it's all about flows.
Yeah. So inside the MuleSoft ecosystem, they have the notion of any point platform, so it's kind of where the cloud meets integration. So this is where you log in, you get access to all the tooling, you get monitoring, you get logs, you get all that wonderful stuff. And so comparable on the other side is just Azure platform, right? So it does more. Obviously, it's not hyper-focused on integration like MuleSoft does, but it has a plethora of everything. If you need databases, if you need cloud storage, if you need all kinds of AI services now being the predominant one that is relevant. That's where they align. So next would be, we're looking at, this is kind of where does it run. So this is the MuleSoft Runtime engine is where you would build all your code, you bundle it up, it gets pushed into a container, that container runs on the Anypoint platform. That's kind of the runtime. That's where the code's actually executing. On the same side, the comparable one in the Azure world, no different, is Azure Logic Apps. So this is where the code would run, can be containerized the same way. So I see those as comparable services.
Low code, no code, which is very important. Everybody in the MuleSoft ecosystems used to low code, no code, so it's a very comparable on that front.
Yeah, so the next bullet really drives that home. So on the MuleSoft side, they call them MuleSoft flows. This is essentially where you orchestrate that integration process. So this is where we pick up a file or we query a database. We are going to transform that code potentially and then ultimately deliver it to its target system. Again, can be a cloud system, can be a database, could be a file. But this is where all of that interaction and mediation, they call it, services really happen. So on the comparable side, on the other side, they're just called very close, but they're called workflows inside a Logic App. Same type of tooling, low code as you mentioned. I can drag out on my palette, orchestrate those services, set some properties, and then deploy in MuleSoft Runtime, or I'm deploying to Azure Logic App. So apples to apples at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll get to showing that. Should we just keep with our show and tell? Okay.
So this one's kind of a funky screenshot.
You can take over the laser pointer.
But I'll kind of talk it through. So inside MuleSoft, when I talked about you going over to the components and you're going to drag them out. So in this one here, we have a trigger. This is a timer trigger. We would have dragged that out. Now, really what I'm trying to demonstrate here is two parts. One is the low-code nature of both of the platforms, Logic App versus MuleSoft Flows. So in this case, the first thing we do is say, hey, every hour, let's run that code. Then we want to set some variables. Then we want to use a Salesforce connector to query some of the data, and on we go. And over here, we're going to get into some data transformation. Ultimately, in this case, deliver it to Business Central, Microsoft D365 Business Central. And then if we look on the Logic App side, so this is a flow as well, it has exactly the same components. So same low-code orchestration. One goes vertically, one goes horizontally. But at the end of the day, if your team likes this low code nature, you're not going to give that up.
Yeah,
right. So
you're familiar with it.
Yeah,
yeah.
So just breaking that down, I flipped it just to kind of show you again what I had said. We got triggers. We can set variables. We have the Salesforce connector on both sides, a plethora of connectors. They both have about over 1,000 connectors each, so you're not going to compromise there. And then when it comes to data transformations, MuleSoft has Data Weave, which is kind of their proprietary transformation logic. It's a functional language. I think I've mentioned this in the past. It takes a little bit to get your head around it, but very powerful at the end of the day. So your team's got to pick up that knowledge. On the Microsoft side, we've got visual data mappers. We can do inline coding, and we can do inline functions even now. Or ultimately, we can step out and call a serverless function as well inside the Azure ecosystem. But that's, at the end of the day, it's about, again, demystifying. The team's not going to see much of a difference in that nature. They both have the same componentry. Let's move over to connectors.
Yeah.
So I did mention on the previous slide, when we're dragging out, we're orchestrating, right? We're mediating that business process. Really, connectors are important. We need to know what they are. I wanted to show again, as a developer experience, you're going to see very much the same capabilities. So when we drag it out, you can see here, there's a bunch of functions and capabilities and methods that can be called up. In this case, we're using the Salesforce connector. Same kind of concept. Azure Logic Apps have connectors, and they're actually a lot of them are shared across the Power Platform as well. So it's kind of like two different ecosystems building all of these connectors and maturing those connectors. So that's something to kind of call out on this side.
Yeah. So if I'm looking to make that migration off of MuleSoft, I want to know that these are familiar. Yeah. Familiar. The UI is familiar. The function is familiar. So this isn't like learning a completely different language.
Right. And you think of connectors. Connectors a lot of the time are just wrapping APIs to just make that, again, low code developer experience better. So yeah, connectors. So think of it in the context of SAP, and I have NetSuite, and I've got Salesforce. These are the connectors that your team's going to want to make sure are there. So again, nothing different. Very much the same, apples to apples. I said earlier. So let's stay with that. This is apples to apples.
Yeah, I like it.
Moving on. So maybe one of the more important parts when I think about, okay, we've built some software, we're running it in Runtime Manager, or we're running it in our Logic App. How does it work operationally? So when things go sideways, what do we have at our capability? We want to make sure we understand that. So in the MuleSoft ecosystem, it's more we log in to our Runtime Manager. From here, it really does look at log files, right? And they max out at times. If you have a very active interface, those logs files roll and eventually roll off, right? So you can't get access to the history of that run. So this is the one I wanted to highlight. This was maybe plus to moving over to a Logic App. So again, these are just log files. You can see there's errors, and you have to read that Java stack trace for what went wrong.
which sometimes can be kind of overwhelming.
Yeah. Inside Azure Logic Apps, they do a fantastic job. On the left here, you're going to see all my run history. So you can see the ones where are successful, we have failures. Essentially, when you click on each one, what it does is, you remember from the design side and the development side, we dragged out each step as we were querying Salesforce. And what's happening here is they are showing me these check marks to tell me, was it successful? Was it a fail? And if each one of these components, if I click on it, it shows me my input payload, and it'll also show me the output of that payload and the error that came along with it. So this is a really step up if you think from an operations
that's extremely helpful.
Yeah, the team doesn't have to be overly technical. I've even seen this handed off to the business side to actually administer their own issues in some cases. Another little key fact there is it also shows each step, how long each step took. So if you had a query that was just seemed to go on and just over time got slower, you could actually use this as an just a high level. I'm going to look back a week before that release went out. Oh, wait a minute, that has definitely slowed down. So it's a nice little, again, when I think about operations, I really like this.
Good point.
Really, really help. And then maybe, if we think of it in this context, we're saying apples to apples. Here's on the left-hand side, what does that equal on the right-hand side? We do not. If I was to categorize it, Tim, I would say these flows really represent about 90% of the integration. It's really orchestrating, mediating, dragging out those components, linking them together. But we do need to talk about.
Yeah, there's other necessary services.
Yeah, that just round out the solution, right? So any point API manager is really how you front some of those flows. So you can put an API in front of it, expose it to other developers in that way. Comparable on the other side is Azure API Management, APIM they call it. The only call out I have here is maybe some of the features that you're going to see on the Azure side are just going to be a little bit more enterprise ready, if you will. A little bit more features, a lot more features. So know that there's a solution for that. We talk about messaging, so that's queues, topics. It's kind of guaranteed delivery of your data between systems. A lot of the time the architecture drives, I need a messaging platform. They have Anypoint MQ. On the other side, you have Azure Service Bus that rounds that out. So know that, there's a solution for that. And then the last part of that we see on the MuleSoft side, a lot of the times you'll use object store for watermarking or object stores to store some data. On the Azure side, you just have more of a complete Azure storage account, which has table storage, blob storage, queue storage, a lot of little feature, a lot more featureful solution there.
Right. Okay, so obviously everyone's well versed in the usage of MuleSoft. Can you dive into Azure a little bit more? Like what other products and services are offered here? Because there's obviously, when you mentioned 200 plus products and services offered under Azure, there's a rich subset of offering here.
For sure. Specifically in the case of, I'm an architect, integration architect, so obviously I want to be aware of what's out there.
Yeah.
So when I think of it, I think there's going to be reusable assets that I want to deploy as APIs, and what are my options around that? And there's Azure Functions, those serverless compute, so I have that at my capability. I have, I need a data lake to start storing some of this large amounts of data that are flowing in through that integration, so I can start to build out data lakes that are just available to me in the Azure ecosystem. Databases will have a place in integration. I need to store some information along the way. I can just thread up a NoSQL database, a SQL-based database. I have a lot of capability that way. Thinking about IoT being in the integration space, so solution around IoT. When I think about even the build and deploy, DevOps, I'm going to be in the Azure ecosystem. I have Azure DevOps at my fingertips. And then maybe more relevant these days is stuff around AI.
Of course, extremely relevant.
AI services or services that are just available to me in that ecosystem. So yes, integration. I think of it from an architect. I want all the capability because it doesn't constrain my overall solution. Maybe another piece to just, when I think about, you obviously want to try this stuff. How can we pick this up and start using it? So it's pay-as-you-go model. So if I want to just start building an integration that's a simplified integration, I can use the pay-as-you-go. I sign up. into my Azure account. I can just start building out. I don't have to go and procure some licensing ahead of time, which is a big differentiator. With
Sure, if I wanted to start wading in and I wanted to start testing, there's no upfront license fee. It's pay for what I use on the services themselves and the consumption I'm using within those services. So it's just an easy way for anyone just to jump in and start trying it now.
And that's the point at which we've even seen customers, there will be 80-90% cost savings against their MuleSoft subscriptions, right? So, they like that they can get involved, get started with it, try it out. Again, low code to low code. I mean, it's pretty quick to get down and started.
Yeah, I mean, anybody watching this, one of their questions is how much is this going to save me? Right. And I think you touched on it, but I think it's a point that's worth laboring on slightly.
Yeah, obviously, trying to do a cost comparison is a little difficult because it's all situational.
Of course.
Right? So it's the context in which. But let's just take, we've seen it where we've taken, say, a nonprofit organization that, they had a couple integrations to build out, and they procured MuleSoft. It's hard to find an ROI when you do a CapEx right at the beginning. I mean, you build out 3 integrations. In those cases, we are seeing easily 90% cost savings because we know those are just 3 simple flows.
Sure.
As you saw, I drag them out, I run the deploy, we deploy it to Logic Apps, and essentially that cost savings is huge because I don't overpay, right? I don't have to buy compute. I don't have to buy,
pre-buy
in this
compute.
Case, like MuleSoft will sell their 2 cores, right? And that's kind of the basic. You can't get less than that kind of thing. So you bought 2 cores that you now are trying to utilize, where in Logic App world, you're just going to pay for kind of that one flow that's running. You bought 3, you deployed 3 flows. That's really all you're paying for, Tim. So we've seen, 70% savings, 80% savings, 90%, but it's north of the 50 mark, right?
Yeah,
no problem.
which is incredible. I mean, if I can have arguably a better product with more capabilities under the Azure umbrella for a tenth of the cost, it's definitely worth taking a look at.
Yeah. So from a demystified standpoint, I can't disagree.
Okay, so if somebody wants to start moving down this road of migration, let's maybe talk about how we help customers do that, and let's talk about basically our approach.
Well, I can speak to it from our perspective.
Of course.
So, we do focus on this as a practice. So we have some things that we offer. So we have what's called a fast start assessment that we provide to customers. And that assessment is really about, I need to know what that ultimate cost is. So we have a tool called MuleShift. And MuleShift for us can help us, it looks at, okay, let me look at what your production vCore usage is. It can read your flows. So we showed you what a flow looks like. Behind that is XML, and behind that's the logic. So we can interrogate that with MuleShift, our tool, and that will really drive up complexity, how many connectors are used, and then we can also look at that runtime manager that we showed at the beginning, and that gives us an indication. This is a 0.2 vCore deployment with this type of volume. We can do some real close math there to get you to what is this going to ultimately, when I migrate, what's that going to cost me in Azure. The assessment also helps you kind of de-risk everything, right? So we want to make sure at this point you have enough information. We've given you a target architecture, which in our case, we follow the Cloud Adoption Framework in conjunction with the MuleSoft 3-layered architecture. So we kind of take in the MuleSoft ecosystem and we have a mapping over to the Azure ecosystem. So the architecture holds. It's not like we're starting over. We can show you that it holds. So I'd say that assessment is really, from our perspective, that's the best way to get started.
Right. So it's an easy way to engage us, principal integration strategists, to really just poke into what your usage, kind of audit the system in a way.
Yep.
Really allow for us to give an assessment to you. So you want to know what's this going to cost?
Yeah.
What's this going to cost for the migration as a project? What's this going to cost ongoing? And I want to know what that cost difference is. Is it actually going to be a tenth of the cost for me? So this is just an easy way for you to get started. Assess the roadmap for yourself. Yeah. If anybody is interested in that, we're more than happy to have a conversation with you.
So I hope this helps. Maybe one thing we didn't touch on is during that migration analysis, we do want to look at your MuleSoft licensing is
right.
expiring, because we do want
Good
to
point.
back that off.
Right.
So the sooner we have this assessment really helps in that way. It gives you what you need to decide if migration is now or later down the road.
Right.
But the sooner we know what the license expiry date is, we usually put together kind of comprehensive how would a migration look for you.
Right, because you don't want to butt up against that expiration date and have to negotiate a short-term license with MuleSoft. It becomes an expensive proposition. So you're right, that's a really important point. And some customers that's been 6 months, and some kinds 2 years. So depending on the complexity, depending on how quickly people want to get at this migration process, we've got the method.
And we do want to continue demystifying, right? Like, this is just one of a few that we're going to pull together here to help just, share our knowledge around a migration so that people out there know that there is an avenue to do it, or to help them make that decision. But we have more coming, right?
In the spirit of further demystifying, we want to take the fear out of this unknown. So we've mentioned a lot about Logic Apps. We've got the principal product manager, Kent Weir, who will be joining us on our next episode, and he'll really dive in on Logic Apps and the flows, demystify that aspect of it. So that's going to be really exciting. Okay, well, that's pretty much it. I think we should get back to work.
Yep.
Let's do it. All right. Thanks for joining us.
Yep.